There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in places that were once loud. It is not the silence of emptiness, it is the silence of absence. The heavy, specific quiet that fills a space where people used to gather, spend, and dream. That silence has been spreading across Dubai. For decades, the emirate operated as a kind of retail mythology, a city that appeared immune to the laws governing everywhere else. No income tax, no economic gravity, a place where cranes never stopped moving and stores never stopped opening. Dubai was not just a market. It was a statement, a proof of concept, that aspiration, when packaged correctly and placed inside a climate-controlled mall, could be sold to anyone from anywhere at any price. For a long time, it worked brilliantly. The Dubai Mall alone, the largest shopping center in the world, hosts over 1,200 stores and attracts more than 100 million visitors each year. The luxury sector was calling the Middle East its brightest performer as recently as late 2025. But in fewer than 18 months, something that seemed unshakable began to tremble. And then a geopolitical shock arrived that no one had fully prepared for, and the trembling became a rupture. West Elm was among the first to go. In July 2025, West Elm Middle East posted a carefully worded farewell on social media, the kind of language brands use when they have been coached on how to leave without triggering alarm. The message was clear. The Dubai Mall flagship was closing, and it was not coming back. West Elm had spent 15 years building a profitable niche in the UAE, operating under a Kuwait-based Al Shaya Group franchise since 2010. The brand occupied the aspirational middle of the home decor market, sleek and considered, expensive enough to feel meaningful, accessible enough to feel achievable. Then the economics shifted. Rising retail rents, declining foot traffic, accelerating consumer migration to online shopping, and a fundamental rethinking by Al Shaya Group, of which brands in its enormous portfolio were still worth the operational cost. By December 2025, every West Elm location across the UAE, Kuwait, and Riyadh had permanently closed, clearance discounts reaching 80%, with no official explanation ever provided. Pottery Barn Kids and Pottery Barn fell at the same time for the same reasons, which made the collapse even more striking. All three brands, West Elm, Pottery Barn, and Pottery Barn Kids, operated under the same Al Shaya Group franchise with Williams-Sonoma Incorporated. They formed a coherent home lifestyle ecosystem, and when one fell, all three fell together. Pottery Barn had served as one of the most reliable anchors of premium home retail in the UAE for 15 years, a brand that imported loyalty from expat consumers rather than having to build it from scratch. That loyalty proved insufficient against the economics of 2025. By December 25th, every store across the Gulf network had shut permanently. Online services had ceased, and thousands of retail workers were left without transition programs. The exit was binary. One day, the stores were open. The next, they were running liquidation sales. What this simultaneous triple collapse exposed was the core structural flaw of the franchise model. It creates a single point of failure. When the regional partnership deteriorates, there is no architecture for anything other than total exit. River Island's departure followed as part of the same franchise unraveling. The brand had been a fixture of Dubai's high street experience, present in JBR, Marina Mall, and within Debenhams at Mall of the Emirates. It understood its customer well, style-conscious, fashion-forward, unwilling to pay luxury prices, but unwilling to compromise on current aesthetics. But River Island had been in structural crisis long before its Gulf farewell, having already closed 33 UK locations in 2025, following court-approved restructuring. Operating under the same Al Shaya franchise, when that infrastructure deteriorated, River Island went with it. What the departure reveals is a structural truth about high street retail in the Gulf. It was always more dependent on franchise infrastructure than on genuine, organic local demand. Debenhams represent something even more historically significant. Founded in 1778, Debenhams spent 243 years as one of the most recognizable names in British retail before collapsing entirely in 2021. 2 administrations, a pandemic, a failed rescue, and 12,000 jobs lost. The brand survived only because Al Shaya Group had kept it physically alive in the Middle East under a licensing agreement. For Gulf consumers, Debenhams was not a relic. It was a living store. By the close of 2025, even that lifeline had been cut. What it represents is the definitive end of the department store format in the Gulf, a model that had already failed everywhere else in the world and had only survived in Dubai because franchise infrastructure kept it artificially breathing. At this point, the story shifts from franchise collapse to something historically larger, the unraveling of the global luxury mythology itself. Gucci had achieved the status of a permanent institution in Dubai. Its stores in Dubai Mall and Mall of the Emirates were pilgrimage sites for tourists arriving from across Asia and Europe. But Gucci had been deteriorating long before Dubai felt the shock. Parent company Kering watched revenues collapse by 22% in 2025, with a 54% share price erosion over 3 years. Then, in March 2026, as the U.S.-Israeli military conflict against Iran escalated, Kering shut all its UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar stores simultaneously. Gucci, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Bottega Veneta, all at once. The luxury mythology requires the impression of permanence. When the Gucci store goes dark in Dubai Mall, something irreversible happens in the consumer's relationship with the brand. The illusion, once broken, does not simply reassemble itself when the doors reopen. Balenciaga's situation carried an additional dimension. The brand had already fallen dramatically in 2022 and 2023, following advertising controversies that triggered a consumer boycott of significant scale. And by 2025, a carefully managed recovery was underway. Then the March 2026 regional closures arrived, and Kering shuttered every Balenciaga presence in the Gulf. For a brand already asking its most loyal customers to believe in its future, a forced closure in one of the world's most symbolically important luxury markets was a setback of a very particular kind. Balenciaga in Dubai is the story of a brand trying to rebuild a house while the neighborhood itself experiences an earthquake. Then came the entry that no one saw coming. Apple closed its Dubai and Abu Dhabi stores on March 3, 2026, framing the closures as temporary security measures in response to the escalating regional conflict. But the symbolic weight was impossible to contain within that framing. Apple does not close stores. The Apple Store is the most carefully protected retail asset in the history of global brand strategy, built into landmark locations, existing to communicate permanence, to signal that the brand is beyond the volatility of ordinary commerce. When the single most valuable company in the history of human commerce decides that a city is not safe enough to sell iPhones in, the signal it sends about that city's stability is unlike anything any other brand closure can communicate. Dubai had spent 50 years building its image as safe, neutral, and commercially accessible. When Apple closed, even temporarily, that image cracked in a way no reopening could fully repair. The stores came back, but the memory remains in every risk calculation made about Dubai by every global brand going forward. H&M and Amazon completed the picture from opposite ends of the retail spectrum. H&M had already been executing one of the most significant store closure programs in global retail, over 200 locations worldwide in 2025. But the Gulf had remained one of its more stable international markets. The conflict changed that calculation. triggering closures in Bahrain and across the region, with consequences falling hardest not on H&M's Stockholm balance sheet, but on the migrant retail workers from South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa, for whom Gulf employment represents the economic foundation of entire families. Amazon's partial shutdown was perhaps the most disruptive closure of all, precisely because Amazon had become the invisible infrastructure beneath Dubai's entire retail ecosystem. With 90% internet penetration across the UAE population and over 100 fulfillment centers operating across the emirate, Amazon was not merely a retailer, it was the circulatory system of modern commerce. When drone strikes damaged 3 UAE data centers and Amazon suspended operations across parts of the region, both the physical and digital retail systems of Dubai were simultaneously compromised. The consumers who felt it most acutely were not the affluent expats who had other means, but the millions of working-class residents for whom Amazon had become the primary access point for basic goods. Everything in this story leads, ultimately, to LVMH. In the first quarter of 2026, LVMH reported revenue of €19.1 billion, down 6%, with the Iran conflict costing a full percentage point of organic growth. The Middle East accounts for 14% of LVMH's total global revenue. But that figure conceals a more important truth. Gulf consumers represent LVMH's most profitable customer segment: full-price buyers, zero-discount customers, high-net-worth individuals whose single transactions generate what the average mid-market consumer does not spend in a year. When Gulf shopping malls reported demand declines of between 30% and 70% in March 2026, the damage was not proportional to the headcount of consumers lost. It was the margin destruction that comes when your highest-spending customers disappear overnight. LVMH shares fell 27% from the start of 2026. The combined market capitalization loss at LVMH and Kering exceeded €100 billion. Global luxury sales declined 2% in 2025, the third consecutive year in which the anticipated recovery had failed to materialize. What these 11 closures, retreats, and disruptions reveal collectively is the simultaneous failure of multiple structural models that had been operating in parallel, each masking the fragility of the others. The franchise model proved efficient during expansion and catastrophic during contraction. The mall model proved vulnerable to the same e-commerce forces that had dismantled it in every other major global market. The geopolitical neutrality model was exposed by the speed and totality with which global brands responded to the conflict. And the luxury model itself, the idea that aspirational spending is structurally immune to pressure, has been undermined by 3 consecutive years of disappointing results. Dubai is not abandoned. It is too large, too wealthy, and too strategically positioned to be abandoned. But it is at a crossroads that 50 years of continuous growth had allowed it to defer. The crossroads where every city eventually arrives, at which the model that built its success must be examined and, in some fundamental ways, rebuilt. The stores that closed are not the story. They are the punctuation in a longer sentence that Dubai and the global luxury industry are still in the process of writing.